Okay. I am back on. Sorry for the interruption. I'm gonna have part two of this. Just have to, let's just see when people hop on again, and then we can continue and complete the live. Everything's going so slow. Alright, if you're here, just bear with me while we get everything up and running again. Alright. This is what happens when you try and do stuff like this in a Mercury retrograde. Yeah. It's been quite good actually. I haven't had any problems, but today has been one of those days. Okay, let me go in here. And that was not the right place to go, I'm pretty sure. Oh, here we go, part two. Okay. All right then. Yeah, should be okay now. Everything's slow on this side still, but it should pick up. Anybody who kind of got sliced off from part one will have to catch up here. Okay. So we'll continue in a second. Yep, there goes my camera again. Joy and fun. Let me try and get this up and then I can change cameras as well. I might as well just do that. It's going to be easy, simpler. Come on. There we go. Let's go. I'm just going to turn. Hi. The cunning folk named W. Johnson managed to find a way to break Mercury's curse. I think Mercury's broken my curse. Hold on, let me switch cameras quickly. Maybe that'll help. Do that. And then I can do. Please work. Come on, switch on. Right. Tell you what. This is just not being much fun. There we go. Okay. All right. Big weird screen. All right. At least we're here. We're all back again. Here we go. All right. So let's carry on. All right. So I was going to get into James Murrell. I think everybody's here. That's fine. We'll have to. They can catch up. Anyway. So Murrell was born around 1785 in Rockford in Essex, England, and his early life was ordinary. He spent time in London, married in 1812, and by most accounts fathered an enormous family, something on the order of like 17 children, which wasn't unheard of at the time. And eventually he and his family settled in the town of Hadleigh, back in Essex, where he worked on paper as a shoemaker. Um, but it's not his shoemaking that got him remembered. Sometime during his years in Hadleigh, Murrell built a parallel reputation as a cunning man, and that reputation grew large enough that people came to him from both sides of the Thames Estuary, which for the period was a genuinely significant catchment area. This wasn't a man known to one village. This was a man people trekked toward. Um, it was to say been going good for a week. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. What did people come to Murrell for? Pretty much the full Cunning folk catalogue. He was known for healing both people and farm animals. He practiced what we'd now call exorcism, driving out malevolent spirits. He located lost and stolen property. He cast horoscopes and did astrological work. He claimed clairvoyant abilities, and central to his fame, he specialized in countering witchcraft, identifying when someone had been cursed and breaking the spell. His most visually striking method, and one that tends to get repeated in every account of his life, was the witch bottle. Murrell would have the local blacksmith forge an airtight iron bottle. The bottle would then be filled with material taken directly from the afflicted person, such as fingernail or toenail clippings, locks of hair, something other bodily fluids, or sometimes other bodily fluids, and then you would set that over a roaring fire. The idea within the logic of the practice was that as the contents inside heated and the pressure built, the pain would transfer back onto the witch who had cast the original curse, forcing them to break it to relieve their own suffering. All right. So people in the area reportedly believed this worked. There are accounts of supposed witches showing up at a victim's door begging for the bottle to be taken off the fire. Murrell's fame outlived him and arguably grew after his death in 1860. By the time the 20th century rolled around, the folklorist Eric Maple went into the Hadleigh area specifically to document what locals still remembered about him, and nearly a century after his death. And he found the legend had only gotten bigger in the retelling. People told Maple that Murrell could fly, that he could transport himself instantly across long distances, that kind of embellishment is a pattern you see again and again with cunning folk who achieved real local fame. The historical person and the folkloric figure start to merge, and within a generation or two, it can be hard to tell where the documented practice ends and the legend begins. He also got a strange second life in print. In 1900, the writer Arthur Morrison published a novel built loosely and pretty liberally fictionalized around Murrell's life and reputation. And of Murrell for the Strand magazine, which is actually one of the more useful sources historians have for separating the documented facts from the folklore that had already started accumulating by the turn of the century. Now, I want to close by coming back to a broader perspective again, because let me just grab a drink first. Hold on. Because I think there's a real reason to care about the figures like Murrell beyond historical trivia. When people talk about the history of witchcraft in Britain, the conversation defaults almost entirely to the persecuted, the woman dragged before the magistrates, the trials, the executions. That history is enormously important and it should never be minimized, but it's not the whole picture. And treating it as the whole picture flattens out a more complicated and frankly more interesting reality that magical practice in Britain wasn't only sometimes done to people, um, or something done to people. For centuries, it was also something people actively, openly, and repeatedly paid for. It was infrastructure. It was a recognized trade with recognized practitioners who built reputations, traveled circuits, and in cases like murals, became famous, became locally famous enough to be remembered 100 years after his own death. Um, Cunning folk occupy this really strange middle space in popular memory, not feared the way witches were, not romanticized the way modern witchcraft sometimes is, mostly just forgotten, filed away as a historical footnote. I'd argue they deserve better than that because they're some of the clearest evidence we have for how ordinary people actually lived alongside magical belief day to day. Not as theology, not as persecution, but as a practical, transactional part of getting through a hard and uncertain life. Now, what was kind of interesting, if I can open this up, hold on. No, it wasn't that. I planned this to do this show quite a while back actually on this topic, but I saw in a Facebook group today somebody actually posted it was actually a statement, not a question. It says witches don't say they are witches. This was a word spoken from broken-minded people that hated on everyone who had a mind of their own. And a lot of people in the comments went absolutely apeshit and kind of said, "Dude, don't tell me what I am and all of this stuff, and I'm a witch and blah 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 and everything else." All right, but it's actually very very true. I know we use the term witches nowadays, or witch nowadays, but back in this time, this period we're actually talking about, the 1500s and such, you did not call yourself a witch. That was a derogatory term. That was something that was used as an accusation. You use things like cunning folk. There was also terms like green gown and things like this. But the word witch actually got repurposed, which is why we use it nowadays to describe what we are, who we are, what we do. But you have to, I think it's very important to understand the history behind all of this and how we came to actually, use these terms and do what we're doing. Because a lot has been forgotten, a lot has been glossed over, which is why I'm doing this Hedge and History show. All right, so that brings us to the end of today's show. Sorry for the break and the interruption. I hope everybody kind of caught up. Um, Richard said so. In other words, a balancing power. Yeah, kind of. It's, even though we had the persecutions and everything else, the trials, witch trials, and all of that stuff, people were still practicing folk magic. So when it came to somebody being accused of being a witch or practicing witchcraft, it was more a case of your neighbor didn't like you, maybe your crops were growing better than his were, and therefore you're going to make more money than he is, and so he accuses you of being a witch so that you can get arrested and all your crops will die and he can make more money. That was the kind of thing that was happening. So witch was used as a derogatory term put on people who didn't really deserve it, and they probably they probably practiced, everybody probably practiced some form of folk magic because it was part of part of their ancestral lineage. Um, but the actual practicing magical person, the person who was practicing the magic, was the cunning folk in some areas. This does kind of get very regional. You don't people like this, magical practitioners, wouldn't call themselves cunning folk right throughout Britain or Europe and etc. etc. There's usually a localized regional word or term for this, but it wouldn't have been witch. It may have been there is the argument that witch comes from one of the etymological understandings is that it comes from the Old English word weecher. There's a masculine and a feminine aspect to that. As we chat and we ch, depending on how you actually pronounce it and say it and spell it and whatnot. But again, that kind of referred to almost like a person that moves between worlds. Like in some regions, we may use the word shaman. That kind of applies in that sense. So, but the problem is that witch became this derogatory term, which was used as an accusation in order to persecute people. But later on, it was repurposed. Okay, it wasn't reclaimed because it wasn't something that people were using before that. It was repurposed, which I think is important to know. Okay. Anyway, so that brings us to the end of today's show. And I thank everybody for being here, um, being in the comments, for listening, and all of that stuff. I'm not sure we got the same amount of people back, but well, we did. We got quite a few in. All right. So I'll see, well, probably everybody here at least on Sunday for next Covenstead. Until then, stay out of trouble. Who's this? Um, I Newton. Hello, hello. John D, the Goat Britain Wizard. Yeah, that's an interesting topic all on its own. It's a pleasure, absolute pleasure. All right. Okay, I'll see everybody next time. Thanks for joining. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.